Well, good morning, everyone. It's really great to see you all here. This is a conversation I've been looking forward to for a while, talking about plants and language and kind of how those two things interact. So thank you all for being here. We have an amazing panel this morning. And I think we're going to get into some, really interesting discussion and conversation about this topic. I wanted to say, for the benefit of our panelists, we are recording this because we knew that this was a small room and that there would be more people interested in this than could attend. So we're going to be putting this on YouTube after the event is over. And so what that means for our panelists, we're going to pass this little microphone back and forth when we do our answers. But it's not actually projecting to the audience, so we still need to raise our voices to project to the back of the room. So use the microphone, but also project. So as far as these questions go, it can be conversational, but again, ask that you trade the microphone when you're going to answer. And just keep in mind, panelists, there's a lot of knowledge on the panel, a lot of information to share, and we want to hear from everyone. Not necessarily on every single question, but feel free to kind of raise a hand and ask for the microphone next. I don't have necessarily an order that will ask you to go in, so we'll just see. I'll pass the mic and see how it goes. But we're going to start off with kind of more introduction. So if you would please just tell us what's the context in which you work with plants, and then share with us briefly how you explain the difference between native plants and non-native plants or adapted plants. Let's start there. We'll start with Jenny.
I think the context in which I currently work with plants, this is a sentence I feel absurd uttering. I'm a writer. I don't know why I don't like saying that, but I despite all of the work that I've done, like as an ecological researcher right now, I'm writing a book about immigrant ecologies. I think I approach all of this kind of with the question of collecting everyone else's stories, kind of, and weaving that into sort of our sort of intuitive sense of how language works and the many entanglements that our language has. I think we have a common sense of the narrative as it is developing around invasive and adaptive species, but we also have all sorts of personal attachments or aversions to that lexicon as it emerges. The other thing that I think is embedded in the way I approach this, I sat down with an indulgent friend yesterday to be like, ask me those questions. I'm going to practice this. And after we chatted for a little bit, she was like, those are the most Asian American answers that I've ever heard. And I was like, I'm Chinese, I forgot. But apparently, I don't know. But I do think that is an important perspective that I bring to this. I think immigrant ecologies is a kind of different and sometimes contradictory framework that it's really fascinating to try to and mesh with these others.
What was the question again?
Thinking about native plants and invasive plants or adapted plants, and what's your context that you work with plants in now?
I get to moonlight. I work for the city, but I get to moonlight as a landscape designer still here and there, and being indigenous. But with the city, we're able to create an indigenous native species relevant planting guide, if that makes sense. It's like a lot of things going on there. I talk with my hands, but I'm like doing this. I should just. You ready? Yeah. No, you're all good. You're good. First of its kind for the city. So there's regional center planning going on in Seattle. There's 6 of them, and Northgate's one of the main ones. And we just ended up creating this planting guide for community to better understand indigenous native relevant species and what that means, but also maybe not so indigenous relevant and native species, right? There's a lot of context in that. So there's a lot of community in Seattle, indigenous community that are not from Washington or have other connections to different parts of Washington, indigenous relative species that they grew out, say in Yakima, which would be like Wapato or camas is the big one lately, right? Is everybody wanting camas? Well, those don't necessarily grow well out here, right? Both being that you got to be really hands-on with them, and particular, eastern camas wants to be burned all the time, right? Like that's what it really likes. There is a saltwater camas out here, but that's not what the people are really making that cultural like references to. So that's kind of where I am, and is this juxtaposition of what is relevant versus what is actually native, and in this world of indigenous, native, all these words kind of jumble up together, trying to find the proper use of these species in an urban environment and are able to really survive and thrive, but really just trying to reconnect people and make that cultural connection again. Whether it was from your past culture or not, getting people get their hands in the dirt, I think, becomes the important thing of it all, and taking ownership of kind of these urban spaces that aren't so tended to well.
That was beautiful. Thank you. Haslachel tuagwalapu Chris Bryden tits dat uyayos chad twalti siayos aria to twalshodzi twalti poyala pabsh ashid awali ilchad alti tsalashali toch ot achwil chad alti dzizalalich. Hello everyone, my name is Chris Bryden. I work for the Puyallup Tribal Language Program. I was born here in Tacoma, but I spent most of my life in Seattle. So the context with which I work in plants, as a language teacher, I decided to go through and look through all of our colonial sources and some of our elder sources to try to compile a plant list. And this list is available on our website, puyalluptriballanguage.org. Oh, before I say anything else, I should also say, even though I work for the tribe and I'm Puyallup, I don't speak for the Puyallup tribe. I'm not an elder or a woman, so I don't have any kind of like cultural clout, really. Anyway, yeah, yeah. I was thinking a lot about how to answer this question, and I really had trouble thinking about it even because I realized that in our language there's no word for non-native versus native that I don't think anybody in my community would even realize are non-native. For example, like broadleaf plantain. We even have a word for it in our language. It's what is it? Shud. Sorry about that. I could have practiced before. And so there's a lot of non-native plants that are technically non-native that were incorporated into our culture as medicines and as resources. And so, again, I really liked what you said. It reminded me that I think in our culture, relationships that you have with the plant are what are more important than actually where the plant is from and what it does. And there's a certain amount of care. When you bring a plant into a new, oh no, this is a whole different part of the conversation. I'm just supposed to introduce myself, right? Yeah, all right. Hoyop Judd, I'm done, thank you.
Hi, I'm Gail Sklar, and I'm an immigrant person. My family came here from Eastern Europe and Central Europe, and some of them were born in England and then migrated here. And I taught for 34 years in the Inner City School of Philadelphia, and I encouraged students to learn about gardening in the 70s, and they even called me Mother Nature because there was a butter parquet commercial, and I had short curly hair, and they called me Mother Nature because I looked like her, which was fun. But I became a master gardener in Pennsylvania in 2005 after having massive back surgery, and loved gardening and got into gardening with native plants of the East Coast. By the way, back east I was what they called a tree tenderer. So, and we did a lot of urban tree work. So, came here, became a master gardener, took a native plant steward program because I knew nothing about the native plants, quote unquote native, here in Western Washington, and went to China Lake Park, and my heart hurt when I saw the state of this park, which was completely covered in English ivy and Himalayan blackberries. And so I've been out there for 8 years, the first Saturday of every month. I am not a botanist. I was a humanities person. I taught humanities. I taught gender courses, I taught human diversity courses, no botany. Last time I taught science of the earth and soil was when I taught elementary school. No one in my family, except my grandmother and one aunt, grew anything, but they didn't grow anything because putting your hands in the soil was a sign of lower class or lower economic class, which a lot of people understand. And I garden everything. My hobby is growing orchids. I have 300 species orchids in a grow room and a garage. And I grow food, I grow natives, I grow plants that are similar to what we call natives but are not natives, and I believe in assisted migration of plants as our climate is changing. So if the first Saturday of every month I'm at China Lake from 9 to 12, you're welcome to come. I am also president of the Washington Native Plant Society, which they told me when I became president it's only 10 hours a week. They lie. They lie. It's like having a full-time job. And Native Plant Appreciation Month coming up is exploring biodiversity through community science. So join us starting April 1st. It's all free.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me. I can't believe I'm sitting up here with you all. There's some of my heroes are up in the on the panel here, and I'm a first-generation tree hugger. I think of my family from the Irish side and Slavic side. Yadrik is a weird last name. That's where it comes from.
The Irish and the Slavic put together.
Yeah. And so I do think, I gravitate towards Pacific Madrone, the best tree in the world. I do feel like there's arbutus has been part of, there's an arbutus tree on the city crest of Madrid, city of Madrid, and it's like the Aloso y el Madroño. And so I think arbutus, kind of the native range of it, is in the Mediterranean. So I kind of have this story that my ancestors like interacted with Madroños a long time ago, and maybe that's where it rubs off on me. Anyway, I was born in Seattle though, and grew up in Federal Way on a lake called Mirror Lake, and so I grew up, running around in the woods, biking with my friends. It was my mom's dream to have horses, so I kind of come from this horsey family. I don't know how, like a single mom was able to raise me and my brother and couple horses at the same time and pay for all that, but we did. Native plants. So I grew up like running around the woods. I really, I think in high school maybe I was like an educator. I went for a week and was like, kids went to camp and I was like a mentor or whatever. And that was maybe the first time I really remembering like somebody officially like telling me, like identifying things and starting to categorize things. Like we did this walk through the woods. A traditional sort of upbringing about plants. I went to college. I would say I was sort of radicalized, I guess, by the spotted owl controversy at the time, and so I was really ingrained at that time to be like loving on like big old trees. And so I really studied forest ecology in college. Again, I studied with like Nalini Nadkarni, who's like a canopy researcher, another one of my heroes. So native plants, like I was basically like, people think I'm like into trees and whatnot, but so that's why I became known about native plants. And then really, I jump-started and I was like, I don't know, just studying trees or studying plants wasn't my thing, so I got into restoration. So I've been doing that for a couple decades now, and that involves a lot of tree planting. And also, this is like a humble brag, but it's not a brag. Like I probably killed more weeds than anyone in the room, or directed like hundreds of acres of like weed removal on herbicide use a few years ago, and almost perfected this weird mix of chemicals to spray English ivy, to eradicate English ivy from the city of Seattle. So it's really, and it sort of wore on me, I would say. Honestly, I had like a mental health crisis a while ago. I don't know, before I came to this tree foundation. And and weeds, it was wearing heavily on my soul. It was I just felt like it became super violent in my heart. And so, but it was compounded on a bunch of things, like a life change. I moved to Tacoma. I was just like maybe running too much, too much coffee, like a lot of things were going on. So climate grief as well was wrapped into that. And so but I emerged with the help of community, honestly. I didn't do it all by myself. I think I emerged a better person, and I feel like I've been having this reckoning with weeds for a while now. And with the help of some folks on the panel, honestly, trying to come to terms with how to manage, be the balancer in the ecosystem that humans have been forever, and in doing it appropriately as a settler, plant ecologist, I guess. And then, sorry, I'm rambling. I'm going to pause here really shortly, but I'm also an herbalist, so I've been learning about different relationships and how we use medicine reciprocally with plants, and learning how to use plants like they have been, or like our ancestors used plants for generations. So I'm a big plant nerd.
Thank you all. That's a great introduction, great start. I want to turn to a term that I think maybe is the most controversial term, I don't know, but that's invasive. We hear a lot about invasive species here, and I think some of you touched on this. I think Michael's the first person I heard say adaptive species, and then native species. So the question I have is, what's your approach to the term invasive species, and how does it relate to the other terms that we've been sharing about? Does anyone want to volunteer to go first? Talk about the word invasive?
Great. It's kind of easy for me. I feel this needs googly eyes, so it's like looking at you all. Invasive, really for me, I started years ago in the design build type of world, so neighborhood, high-end residential type stuff. Invasive was a term that we always use just for unwanted, right? It didn't necessarily mean that it wasn't native or a weed, right? Like the term of weed, it fell in with that as well, of just something that, especially for high-end homes, wasn't wanted, into a plethora of different definitions of what that could be. I think more in terms of just something that takes over, I think it's starting to be a bit more disassociated with that. But I'll probably leave that to Michael to speak to a bit more. Through in my work, and then the type of community stuff that we're writing up policy and Wyse, and being able to loosely define what invasive is and what that actually means, and talking to Michael and working with Michael for a handful of years now, which is amazing. Really, again, loosen that term of what that actually means, and really have a conversation over the root of why that is being considered an invasive, and then is it beneficial or not, I think is kind of where we start to really get into is, is it invasive? Is it beneficial, or is it not beneficial, or versus is it useful? Is there a use for it? What is the ecosystem really trying to show you and speak to you about of the benefits of this particular species that may be out of place, and then really going from there to discuss what to do.
Okay, for me, in restoration work, the term they use, invasive, is defined as the plants that take over natural habitat and prevent plants that evolved in this environment to be successful and continue to grow. And at China Lake, we're busy taking out lots of English ivy by grubbing. We don't use pesticides at all. We're not allowed to. It's a wetland, and I wouldn't use pesticides anyhow because I don't like them. It's poison, and from my perspective, I just don't do it, but people do is their privilege to do. And also Himalayan blackberry. A lot of the locals are upset with us for getting rid of it because they like to pick it. But we have lots and lots of fireweed, which is not a weed. And weeds, to me, are plants that we just don't want in that place or that we think are annoying, like shotweed. For some reason, shotweed has become you can eat shotweed, it's a cress, and you can wash it. But, so there was an area at China Lake that was all covered with English ivy and climbing up the trees. So we were making life rings around the trees, which is when you go up to a tree and like at your chest level and pull it down and get rid of it 5-10 feet away. There was a tree that was so weak that from the ivy just drying it out, it had no roots, and I went over with the finger and just went like that, and the tree came down. It wasn't an old tree, it was a youngish tree, maybe 18 years old. But to me, when English ivy does that, that's not a good thing. And it's competing with our plants that evolved here. And so we got rid of a whole large area and we put in ferns, banks of ferns that are just so beautiful now. And we're still fighting the battle, but so to me, that's invasive. To me, a plant that's invasive is defined as a plant that will outcompete natives. It's like invading armies coming in, so to speak. Anyhow. I'm sorry if invasive is a term that's offensive to people. That's what I was put. That's all.
So, I think your question kind of begs a decision, right? Like, if we all recognize that the use of this word is sometimes problematic, I think, the decision is, are we going to figure out a way to kind of like parse the problematic aspects of the term from the parts of the term that we want to retain? Or are we going to say like, oh, this is a word with inherently cultural valencies, and like that's something that we should lean into?
Could you talk about why it might be problematic? Like, what are the problematic aspects of invasive?
I think actually some of what we were just talking about here, right? I think the connotation of the word invasive, that you're coming in from outside, maybe it's not even the connotation, it's the denotation. You're coming in from the outside and you're taking over, right? And I think this is part of what I was like, oh, like this is an immigrant's perspective, and probably in particular an Asian American perspective, one that was thrown into high relief during the COVID crisis, right? Is these like outside invaders coming in, imperiling native is like, I think, a broad term in this context, but this is what Yellow Peril is all about, right? So I think that like Asian American environmentalists, which there's surprisingly a lot of us, I think have a particular sensitivity to this word, right? My response has no sort of tongue-in-cheek response is to casually, if someone talks to me about invasive species, I substitute a word. My term is not catching on. Feel free to help me catch it on if you're so inclined. When I respond back to them, I just say diasporic species, and then some of them are like, yeah, whatever, I don't get it, and then they keep going, and then some of them are like, what are you talking about? And then like it's time to like put up the fist, metaphorically speaking. But I think that's a really good conversation to have. I think that's actually a fascinating term, because diaspora actually comes from the Greek word to sow over, so it's inherently an agricultural or botanical term. It remains a problematic one. I'm not saying that this erases the problematics. If anything, it throws them into high relief. But to say that we understand that plant migration and human immigration are inextricably entwined, that we have like certain moral obligations because of that, and we're not going to shirk those obligations. I think that's important to me. Yeah.
I love that term. Thank you.
I can say something. I don't know how relevant it will be or good, but I always think of the word invasive as, again, I don't think it's a very relevant term. I think it says more about us as the speakers of that word than it does actually about the plant that we're talking about. So like what you were talking about, Well, so in our epistemology, our way of thinking about the world is that plants and animals were all created to live in relationship with everybody and everything around them. And these plants didn't invade, they were brought here against their will, maybe, who knows? And yes, in our epistemology, they have wills. And we brought them here to serve our purpose. The relationships that they had with their relatives, wherever they evolved, have been broken. And so when they become invasive or problematic or they don't serve our purpose, it's not them, it's our lack of understanding them, and it's our lack of applying the correct level of relationship building with that plant. And so, for example, you were talking about your system of controlling English ivy. That would be an example of a way of building a relationship with that plant. It's here. We brought it here against its will, probably, and we have to find a way for it to find a relationship to our environment here. And like I was saying, there are a lot of plants that in our community we don't consider to be invasive or non-native because we formed a relationship with them and vice versa. And again, we throw around the word use a lot, how we use this plant. And again, our way of looking at things is much more reciprocal, that we have an obligation to the plants as well if we're going to use them, for example. I had a bunch of other profound things I was going to say, but I can't remember what they are now. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, this term, I could talk about this for hours. I'm glad we have hours here. I remember when I talked about horses, when my mom had horses, the first weed I remember being identified for me was tansy ragwort. Right, so everyone's like, everyone's starting to roll their eyes, right, when you hear tansy ragwort, because you, pretty much across the board, people think it's poison. Okay, thanks for doing this together, right? So it's poison, potentially known to be poisonous to livestock. But how do we learn that? And who tells us that? Or do we have we actually seen, did my horses die from it? No. So it is, and even in herbalism, even though this tansy ragwort, where it originates from, let's say, it has been used as medicine, probably in minute quantities, but pretty much across the board, it's a threat to livestock, which is a threat to capitalism, essentially, and landholders and everything. So there's a very privileged amount of few people who get to characterize things as invasive. I kind of am in that club, I would say, but really across the board, the state noxious weed boards categorize it and actually regulate its control. So people who find that plant on their land are required to remove it. Even though, do we all have does anyone own livestock in the room? Chickens? Okay. Yeah, so it's kind of context specific. Right, but we have lost this relationship with it. I don't know, I don't think anyone's grandma or grandpa told them how to use it for medicine or what else it's good for. Even English ivy, how much do we really know about English ivy? I guess I've done a deep dive on it because it's one of those ubiquitous invasive species, overabundant species, and it can throw the balance off, I think, in a forest. But in Europe, it's seen as habitat. It's a liana, right? So it has this very unique structure that we really don't have in Pacific Northwest forests. It climbs trees. They study it extensively. There's I don't know if anyone's a fan of Google Scholar. Just go in and type in English ivy and uses or whatever. It's studied extensively for cleaning the air inside a house, even outside. There's in China Lake, how many vehicles pass by China Lake every day on Highway 16? 20,000, let's say. I don't know, sorry, it's not a quiz. But honestly, I would say there's a function of that, and I would say not every tree that has ivy climbing up it is going to fall. Over time, perhaps, but we can manage that. There's a tactics, I think, to manage that. And I think we can coexist with it, but I do feel in certain areas, we want like again, years ago, I was perturbed by driving up and down the freeways and seeing blackberry and ivy covering the state of Washington's right-of-ways. And I was like, why doesn't someone do something about this? But it's like where those plants are very well adapted to that sort of environment. And it's very expensive to convert that sort of landscape or that plant community into something that's native. So in some ways, I feel like the weeds that we drive by every day are providing a service for us and whatnot. So yeah, ivy, I think the one thing that you do if you're trying to study invasive species is just to pick one and just do the deepest dive you can on it. And that's why ChatGPT exists or whatever. You know, you can have conversations about all these plants and like learn about their role, like where they're from and what people have used it for in the past.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you. I think I'm sitting here wondering sort of like why this particular issue arouses so much passion in people. Because I feel like when I talk to people that are into native plants, for example, they're very into native plants. And I don't know, I just wonder if you have thoughts on why this particular conversation maybe arouses so much interest, or is it about using the right words, or is it about doing the right practices or managing the landscape in a way that's correct? What do you all think about that?
I wonder if the core of it isn't any of those things, and it's this like sort of like larger worldview question of, is there some sort of pristine version of the past that we're hoping to like restore back to? Or my own personal philosophy is that everything is screwed up. Give me a tree that's going to exist in like 20 and 100 years. All other problematics, whatever comes along with that, whatever, I'll take it. Give me the tree. So those are two very different ways of like looking at the world. I'm a real downer, and my whole like view of all of the rest of it, and all of the passion that I have for the topic, I think comes from that sort of pragmatic survivalist mode. I'm from North Idaho. What can you say there?
I'm from Montana, Wyoming, so I get it, right? I think it's inherent of us to have this savior complex mentality, I think, in a lot of people, that we can come in and help a situation, whatever that might be. Is it to remove an invasive, or is it to add or delete? To be extractive. It's what we are. Culturally, and in most cultures, in understanding that, I think where some more of indigenous culture really never had that perspective on a lot of things. I'm half German too, half German farmers from Montana, right? So it's a beet farmer, right? Yeah, I gotta love those sugar beets. You can't even eat them. You gotta like break them down into sugar. And you know, the other indigenous side of me in Wyoming, we had a 700,000 acre cattle ranch, right? So it's like these things are very apparent of kind of what's trying to happen there. So, but just an extractive, I think, just humanistic approach to things of us being the dominant being in an ecosystem, especially an urban one, looking at things of where can we extract from to help out this other thing to, you know, help it thrive. I think that's just inherent of us in general. Not that that's good or bad, it's just being able to understand our role in particular systems that can help or detract, and just understanding that dominance aspect, I think, to them becomes really important, that we don't necessarily look to a lot of the times, because what we're doing is right majority of the time, right? Or what we feel we are doing is correct or right, and what that actually might mean. So a lot of the more theoretical response and what that actually, kind of our role in things, is just being able to step back and understand, and our actual dominance on the environments that we're in.
I feel like I should say something. So I think I don't think I feel that you were talking, this drive to protect native plants specifically. For example, I love orchids too. I don't have 300. And also.
Not yet.
Not yet. Yeah, exactly. And the Mediterranean arbutus, those are some of my favorite fruit. They grow all around my house. There are some native plants that I specifically choose to grow for various specific reasons, but I don't think I'm preferential. Yeah. I don't know if that was helpful or not.
On my home property, I don't have all native plants. I got rid of the lawn and I have dwarf conifers, and I'm putting in more natives, what they call native plants. Who knows where they originally came from? And some of them get they like to take over. What do they say? Nature abhors an empty space. So, dandelions serve a purpose for mason bees when they first come out. And I'm listening to what you're saying about the language, because I know language frames the way you think. So that's why I preface when I talked about invasive as I was taught, because there's a difference between maybe what I was taught and what I am struggling to find a better word. And plants were brought here by people like, you brought up Scotch broom. It was brought up by a gentleman from Scotland who really missed that plant, and now it's all over here. The same thing with like bunnies. They're all over here. They escaped. They were being used for training for dogs, and they escaped, and now they're all over here eating my plants. And I have a lot of molehills on my lawn, a little bit of lawn that I have left to walk on for my dog and me, and I don't care. I don't mind them. They don't bother me. They're eating bugs that might be harmful, and the best way to get rid of them is get rid of lawn and put in natives or non-natives that can live here. I do object to plants that smother out, though, other plant populations, and because some of the plants that we have here are just so beautiful and we can't see them to appreciate them because they're covered over. And every plant has a place. And in fact, the first time I saw English ivy growing up into like a shrub, I didn't even recognize because the leaves look different. And it's when they fruit that it's a problem. And I was told sometimes it's the weight of the ivy that could become a problem. Back east at the University of Pennsylvania, where I went to school for a while, it's all over the buildings, and the tunnels go in and dig out, ruin the walls of the building. And there's a wonderful book that I could recommend, The Light Eaters. It's a wonderful book. It talks about how plants can't move, but we move them. They can't migrate. We're the ones who migrate them. We bring them with us for whatever reason we do. I tend to like to put in plants that aren't real aggressive and spread a lot, that I can contain because I'm disabled, and it makes it easier for me to control my property. But I respect people for whatever they put in, and if people want to grow English ivy on their lawn, as long as it doesn't climb up and bury for the birds to eat, I don't care about it because I don't want it spreading on my property. The same thing with holly. There's a big dispute going on in the invasive weed board for the state. They want to call holly a low-class C plant. It was brought here, and the holly growers are now trying to introduce a bill in the state legislature to prevent it from being labeled that, because it's a growth thing. And holly is very pretty, and everything has its place, but I don't want it growing on my property. And if you have it, if you don't get out all the roots, you got a lot more holly growing. It keeps it coming. But people need to do what they like on their private property. I encourage trees, shrubs that absorb the bad stuff in the air and clean it, and it's wonderful. So anyhow, and I love Tacoma Tree Foundation, and Sarah Lowe, who started it, is a friend of mine, and I'm delighted to be here, so I don't know if I'm helping with anything, but I'm rambling. I caught it from you, the rambling.
The rambling, sorry, I'm prone to it. I'll keep this one short because I do feel like we're just addressing language. I think was that the question? Address language. What? Right. I mean, I get worked up about it. My watch just told me to relax like 5 seconds ago. I'm just keeping it locked down inside. I did actually create in collaboration with some folks across the U.S. virtually, mostly virtually. I know a few people in person. There's this organization I'm involved with called Just Language. So if you go to this website called justlanguage.org, that was one of the initial projects that people were asking for, was like, what words do I use instead of invasive, right? So there's a whole, we just put it online. There's a conversation guide and a language guide that's on the website right now. So if afterwards I could airdrop you the link or whatever, but it's pretty easy to find. So I found like a few years ago, I just removed invasive from my lexicon, is that the right term? From my language, yep. So and when I do say it, sometimes I use air quotes now. So yeah, invasive. But there's lots of other, that's the cool thing about English, I guess, but language in general is that it's nimble, and there's lots of different words to describe it that are less violent. And we don't need to even naming things. English laurel, English holly, Japan or Asian carp was the other one that came up the other day when I was on a consultation with Department of Fish and Wildlife. They're like, you need to remove Asian carp from all the stormwater ponds. And I was like, that's not my job. I'm the plant guy. But it was just anyway. So what was my point? I'll pause there. But anyway, language-wise, I feel like I said, I felt like in my heart, I had issues just wiping out, scraping all, acres and acres of blackberry and ivy out of forests, and then trying to replant in these very light-limited soil or even moisture-limited conditions. I just found it super challenging. So, I felt like it was super violent. So I did feel like changing my language as a portal to a better relationship with the plants. So.
Can I just add a little bit? I think a lot of us are saying, right, is a lot of this is prescriptive and in our work. So the word invasive kind of gets, there's not a need for it, I think. I think what I'm getting in hearing is a plant exists because it exists. There was a need for it at some point in time, right? So being able to apply that plant to something more prescriptive. I use the word rehabilitation versus restoration a lot because I'm not necessarily trying to restore to a point in time. If a landscape is sick, I'm trying to help it out, right? And it could be to a point that it never experienced before because it didn't have those particular species of plants on it. So being able to take the time piece out of it a little bit, be a bit more prescriptive on what it is we're using, and that then in turn, we might not be using a native species in that particular instance. We might be using something that, like a holly or or an ivy or something that will be able to take care of it.
Minutes for some questions. So if you have a question, I might just have you stand up and I'll hand you the microphone, and you can, if you have a question for a specific person, feel free to ask, but anyone want to have a burning question answered? Or a smoldering one? Yeah.
A question for the whole panel. I think you guys have talked a lot about storytelling and sort of the importance of redeveloping relationship and connection to plants. Which I think a lot of us living in current urban Western contexts are pretty devoid of and have lost a lot of that connection. And I'm curious if you all have organizations or examples of people doing work that's specifically about storytelling and maybe using art and different modalities to excite people about stewardship and re-enhance that connection.
The one person that, for me, that is a lot of a front of this for especially Coast Salish culture is Valerie Seagrass. Yeah, she's amazing. And the city has been using her a lot in her work, whether it be at the aquarium. She's the one that helped me with the planting guide. Her and I do a lot of work together, being able to connect Mokoshu culture, Coast Salish culture with these plants, making them relevant again. I think a lot of the times they've lost their relevancy, and so she's being able to speak for them and give them voice again. It becomes really important, and even for people like me, again, in a position that's able to create these documents and provide policy for communities. She's the one at the forefront for me, and she's. Man, I feel like she has a degree in everything and was going to have a PhD, get a doctorate at built environments. Never did, but I think her passion is really like nutrition and food systems.
She was the first one that came to my mind also. Her material is around my desk right now at home. And also, she's an amazingly nice person, amazingly smart, and her curriculum also involves language and a lot of cultural relevant stuff, and I just put language in it, and I'm down. But yeah, same answer.
I can't think of the gentleman's name, but he told a story, and we used him for MPAM last year, and he told a story about experiencing a prairie burn, and how he didn't use that on the talk, but he shared that with me, and he's a fabulous storyteller, and I want to say David Thomas, but I don't think that's the right name. Is it the right name? Okay, I'll look it up, but you were shaking your head. Yeah, but he told the story of watching how they were doing a prairie burn near the Mimis Mounds, and everybody put their suits on, and he said, "Okay, I'm going to step back because this is a burn." And he said, and the gentleman who had him there from the Department of Natural Resources said, "No, you're going to do the burn." And he did the burn, started doing the burn, and he said he had all these memories and all these feelings, like the blood memory, coming up and feeling his ancestors in him. Or I'm not expressing it as well as he could, obviously, because I'm not him. But it is, it just, you feel like this inner feeling. Inner feeling. I have that inner feeling when I'm in the soil, working with soil, that there's some kind of memory in there for me, going back generations and generations. I'm an Ashkenazi Jew, so we were not always allowed to own land as a people. So a lot of us lost touch with that, being able to do that. So being able to work in the soil is so beautiful for me and just brings back memories, so I could identify with him. And I actually got chills when he told his story because there was resonance in it for me. The language was just so beautiful. I'm sorry. By the way, during the pandemic, there was a series of workshops on how to use language, how to change our language thinking about plants like invasive, and it was just overwhelming how much there is to think about with that. So.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll just say one, like somebody popped up on Instagram a couple days ago called the Invasive Art Initiative, like in British Columbia somewhere. So it's like things like that. I think you're talking about art where you're like using the plant for things. Maybe could be eating the plant, I guess, or using it to make medicine. But, they're making paper out of Ailanthus altissima or, leaves or whatever. But I do think canoe journey herbalists as well are very important. Yeah, I'm honestly an herbalism apprentice with Hawthorne and Honey, the herbalism school in Tacoma. I think there might be a brick and mortar shop in Proctor pretty soon. We'll see. But I do feel like interacting with the plants in like kind of novel ways, not just spectating them, I think is important just to actually prune them and use them for because they've just been they've just been there waiting for us.
You said hawthorn and honey?
Oh, yeah. I think my answers to this might be a little different because, I think I've been surprised by how much of the conversation that we've been having here today has also been happening in other spaces that don't seem as if they would be even that involved with plants necessarily. I know my publisher, like a diasporic Asian publisher, Kaya Press, has so many conversations about what does it mean to be invasive, and that ends up including conversations a lot like what we've had today, even though you'd think like a diasporic Asian publisher, what on earth does that have to do with trees? I think as far as just sort of like publications around about the West, High Country News, I think, has done like a remarkable job of like shifting from a publication that kind of had this sort of like conventional colonial view of the West. I mean, it's been around for like so many decades, to shifting to a very different kind of exploration of what it means to like live here in our present moment.
Thank you. We just have about maybe 5 minutes left, and I wondered if anyone had like an appreciation for the panel as well, or a question as well. So you're welcome to choose either one. Anyone have a last question or a comment?
I had a question.
Yeah?
In your introduction, you said when you bring a plant into, in your introduction, when you stopped your introduction, you said when you bring a plant into, and you didn't get a chance to finish your sentence. I was interested in what you meant by when you bring a plant into.
I don't recall.
Is it bringing a plant into your space, or just the fact of bringing a plant anywhere? I mean,
I don't recall the context I was talking about, but
Thank you.
I'm sorry. I apologize. I don't remember the context, and so that plays a big part of it. But I think a lot of what has been simmering in the back of my head is just the amount of effort the amount of care that we owe to a plant when we bring it into our world or into a new environment. And I think as a culture, we tend to forget that. We tend to put it in our yard and, it died. Or else, it took over everything. Not my problem. Whereas in reality, I think because we brought it here, we brought it into our space or a new space, we're responsible for caring for it and building a relationship with it. So I think that's probably where I was going to. Yeah.
We view things as plants being our relatives, though we're not from the same species. We're all living on this earth together. So a lot of that is as we would welcome a person or care for a person, we do the same for our relatives.
Okay, one last comment in the back.
I wanted to thank you all for your time and for your thoughts in terms of the relationship and responsibility that we as humans moving and migrating plants with us as we move and migrate throughout the world, and our responsibility to keeping the balance in favor of protecting biodiversity and or as we are a part of that biodiversity, how we influence it and what our responsibility to that is. That wasn't a question, but it could have been.
Thank you.
You were listening. That was really good.
Yeah. I think that kind of closed us out in a great moment. I want to express a lot of gratitude to our panelists for their expertise and wisdom and good words and sharing it with all of us. So thank you.